Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Myslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Robert Sikes is the Keto Savage, founder of the Keto Brick, and accomplished keto bodybuilder. Robert hosts the Keto Savage podcasts, the popular Keto Savage YouTube channel with vlogs, cooking demos, and he also coaches clients through online coaching to improve their health, performance, and body composition. I've had the pleasure of being on the Keto Savage podcast twice and had Robert on my podcast previously. Definitely check out that episode if you haven't seen it. And I found Robert to be an exceptional host. It's one of my favorite podcasts. I love how Robert truly listens to his guests, connects with them on a deep level, and isn't afraid to take the shows wherever the guest wants to with conversations. So welcome back, Robert. Super excited to chat with you today.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. And props to you for having such a well-formulated intro. Like my podcast intros pale in comparison to that.
Yours are great. I love when every single podcast, you're like the one and only.
Everybody the one and only, man. Gotta get
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So what's new in life for you? What's been going on recently?
Man, there's been a lot of new things for sure. Like personally, I'm like from a fitness standpoint, I'm really just trying to get things dialed in for a really productive building phase. But like professionally from a business standpoint, we just made a massive investment and purchased a building that we're going to eventually move our headquarters up to in Northwest Arkansas. So that's been taking a ton of energy and causing a whole lot of lack of sleep. But those are some of the big picture things that we've been really diving into here lately. Yeah,
that's awesome. And let's talk a little bit. I'd love to talk about the factory and the move, but let's start on the nutrition side. Maybe like to start, talk through folks through how you think about like competition preps and off season. It seems like you like to take a very deliberate approach to long improvement seasons or off seasons.
Yeah, totally, man. So I've been bodybuilding for 12 years now, and I've been ketogenic for 6 of those years, I guess. So about half my time bodybuilding, I've been ketogenic. And whether you're keto, whether you're doing a flexible dieting approach, whether you're doing, if it fits your macros, no matter what diet you're doing, it's really, really important to have a period in which you're in a caloric maintenance or surplus and a period in which you're in a caloric deficit. So like when you're trying to lean down for a competition, cut a lot of body fat, or just be healthy and shed some extra pounds for the beach, you're going to be at a caloric deficit. And then when you're going to try and focus on building lean tissue, improving metabolism and putting on some size, you're going to need to be optimally in a caloric surplus. So you don't want to cut either of those phases short. I mean, you need to give each phase the time it's due. Typically, you want to be in a maintenance or surplus for a longer period of time than you're in a cut. At least a good 3-to-1 ratio is what I recommend. I do a much longer ratio than 3-to-1 simply because I'm going to an incredible extreme when I do a competition. So the average person is not going to get down sub 4% body fat. So they don't need to be in a maintenance or surplus as long. With me having that very extreme, cutting period for a competition prep, I like to spend a good, 2 or even 3 years in a caloric surplus, focusing on putting on some more size before I lean down again for the next competition, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I think so many people do this completely ass backwards, where they try to stay super lean all the time. And, if you're overweight, if you're unhealthy, that's fine. Like, don't focus too much on building mass, like lift weights and get in a calorie deficit. I'm totally cool with that. But if you are a guy or a girl and you're at a somewhat healthy weight and you've been lifting for a while, like you really need to have dedicated periods of maintenance or massing to build muscle. it gets harder and harder to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. So it's super important. And just as like to take your body out of the stressful state of a calorie deficit. I think way too many people make the mistake of trying to stay too lean too often. And it's perpetuated by Instagram and social media.
100%, man. And there's so many people as well that are not even necessarily in a healthy place yet. They may still have to lose quite a few pounds, but they've been just chronically dieting for so long that their metabolism's just, gone down the tubes. And even those individuals would benefit from a period of at a caloric maintenance or surplus before going back into a deficit. Like even if they're not in a quote unquote healthy spot, like having some time at a surplus is going to benefit their metabolic rates, which is going to make their next cut exponentially more effective. I mean, they're going to be just spinning their wheels if they just continually try to cut calories.
Yeah. I remember it may have been a year or two ago, you had an excellent video on how you build your metabolic rate through like reverse diets and things like that. So is that what you're doing? That's what you're doing now, correct?
Yeah. So I started dieting for my last prep. My last competition season was in 2017. And then I had planned on competing several times this year in 2020. I started dieting for this year's season in November of last year. And then I had planned on peaking during the summer months. But then that's when the virus broke out and all my competitions got canceled, unfortunately. So I went through a reverse diet period and I spent about 12 weeks ramping calories back up. And then I did like a 5.5 day fast to kind of wipe the slate clean and start fresh. And then I did like a month of intuitive eating just to kind of, regain my focus and whatnot. And then now that month of intuitive eating is over, I'm back to tracking macros at a surplus and, focusing on getting the numbers dialed in to really optimize for building lean tissue.
Oh, super interesting. There's so many things there I want to touch in on. But you mentioned your recent bodybuilding contest journey and being impacted by COVID. What happened for folks who aren't familiar, and why did you choose the route you did? And maybe what did you learn from that experience? Yeah,
so it's crazy because the virus has had a profound impact on us all. Like no matter what industry you're in, no matter what your profession is, your passions, your family, your livelihood. I mean, everybody has been impacted in some form or fashion by this whole pandemic. For me, just from like a bodybuilding perspective, I'm not talking about the relationships with the business, but just from a bodybuilding perspective, I take a long time to prep for shows. So I prepped for 22 weeks for this show. And I started my prep at the beginning of November last year. So I sacrificed Thanksgiving, I sacrificed Christmas. Like I put it all on the line for this year's season. And then the first show was lined up and ready to go. And then COVID broke out, and literally 1 week before the show, before I was going to be on stage, it got canceled. So that was like heartbreaking and gut wrenching for sure. I mean, you put so much on the line for a competition prep, you sacrifice so much for so long, to have it just swept out from underneath you, moments before it's going to happen. It's just, soul crushing, but you either let that defeat you or you learn from it and have like a stoic approach to it, which is what I try to strive for and become better for it. So what I did was, rather than just throwing up my hands and saying, okay, it's not worth competing, I went ahead and went through with my protocol. I went through with my plan. I dieted down, and I basically scheduled this big photo shoot and treated the photo shoot like I would show day. So I peaked for that photo shoot. I manipulated all my macros and training for peak week of the photo shoot. I got a bunch of professional photos done, and that's kind of what I had to show for it. And just like the mental fortitude I gained from pushing through when there was quote unquote no reason to, really benefited me as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think I found you, and a lot of people probably find you for the bodybuilding content or for the keto content, but some of the stuff you put out there around mindset, and really your whole series around the contest prep, and how much thought and diligence and discipline you put into it, and then seeing you get that news and you go through the decision and explain your decision transparently to all your followers and viewers around scheduling the photo shoot, and then reflecting on it afterwards and sharing like your celebration with your family and your Keto Brick team. I found that to be like so powerful, and really taught me a lot too. So thank you for doing that.
Man, you give me goosebumps right now. I'm like reliving yeah. The moment. But yeah, man, I mean, like, it's like I said, everybody's got hardships and trials and tribulations. But like for me, bodybuilding is so much more than just bodybuilding. Like it's not about just cutting calories, dropping food, and stepping on stage and flexing your muscles after getting a spray tan. Like it's a lot deeper than that. I mean, I grow just so much as a human from like a mindset standpoint, but also like a resilience standpoint. I just grow. Like I develop more in the 22 weeks it takes for me to do a competition prep in the few weeks after for the reverse diet than I do, a normal 2 years of just not dieting, not prepping. There's just so much you learn about yourself in that very short period of time in the grand scheme of things. And, having that all unfold the way it did, it just gave me so much more perspective, and it really made me appreciate the people that are in my corner. So like you watching those videos, you saying that means more to me than you realize, bro.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's super interesting to observe. And I think a lot of people probably go through what you're going through and have the mental struggles, but no one is as consistently producing amazing content about it. So that's really, really great. And I think a lot of people gain a ton from it mentally. Yeah. So getting back to kind of the X's and O's, a lot of people say you can't build muscle on a ketogenic diet, or they say that it's really suboptimal. Like a ketogenic diet is good for the fact that it suppresses your appetite, or people say it's so restrictive that it makes it really easy to eat less foods and to diet. But, you would never want to bulk on a ketogenic diet because, once you meet your protein needs, you'd have to eat so much fat to get in a calorie surplus. And, either one, that's not palatable, or two, it's like suboptimal compared to carbs and some of the ergogenic aid effects they have, and the anabolic effects that carbohydrates have. So I think you've proven that wrong time and again with yourself and clients. But what do you kind of say to that? And then love to ask you like how you make some of that stuff work.
Yeah. So there's a certain demographic of people that feel like you can't even gain weight and body fat with keto, which I just want to totally dispel that rumor. I mean, you can definitely get fat on keto. Like I'm fluffier now in a reverse or in a building phase than I am in a contest prep, and I've stayed keto the whole time. So you can absolutely eat at a caloric surplus and put on body fats from a strict ketogenic perspective, from a strict carnivore perspective. Like if you're taking in enough food, enough fuel, enough calories, you'll put on mass, whether that's body fat or lean tissue. As far as optimizing for building muscle, and for cutting body fat, I honestly 100% think that there's just no better way to cut down for a bodybuilding show and retain as much lean tissue as possible as you do with a ketogenic diet. Like everything that you're looking for in an optimized prep protocol is present with a ketogenic diet once you get everything dialed in. So I'll stand behind that 100%. I can also see the argument for it not being, superior or optimal for building lean tissue. However, caveat here, it's all about time, time, consistency, and compounding effect. So like you may in fact be able to build more lean muscle tissue in a finite period of time with carbohydrates, but you could also build more lean muscle tissue in a finite period of time with anabolic steroids. I mean, it's like what battle are you trying to win? For me, at the end of the day, I feel like my ability to conserve muscle when I'm going through a prep offsets any minuscule amount of muscle I would have gained over a ketogenic diet if I was eating carbohydrates in the building phase. So say, all things equal, I've got a clone of myself and the clone's eating a bunch of carbohydrates and I'm staying strict keto during the building phase. That cloned version of me may in fact, maybe not, but maybe be able to put on a little bit more muscle mass, but they're also going to put on more body fats. That's just kind of the nature of the beast when you're eating more carbohydrates. When we cut down, we step on stage 22 weeks later, I've conserved more lean muscle tissue, so I look better on the actual show day. And that is what I'm trying to achieve. And I feel like that is more sustainable. It's going to be more conducive to better joint health, which in time is going to allow me to train more frequently, more intensely. So that's going to compound. And I think when it's all said and done, the smoke settles and the dust clears, you're not going to be hindered. You're only going to be helped from an ability to build muscle if you're following a legitimate ketogenic protocol and not eating a bunch of carbohydrates.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think your point around, you can manipulate your weight one way or another on any diet is so true. I think folks who say you can't get fat on carnivore, um, haven't met everyone.
Yeah,
and how high are your calories now, Robert?
right now, I'm only at about 3,000, which is a pretty conservative intake for me. I mean, I've got, there's something that exists, but called, I like to call it there's a homeostatic set point to your weight, basically. And you can have a maintenance caloric intake, but that maintenance caloric intake can have a pretty broad window. So I can probably stay the same, 180 pound version of me, whether I'm eating 2,800 calories or whether I'm eating 3,800 calories. Anywhere within that window, my body's weight doesn't really move. I feel and perform better at different points in that window. So I've kind of moved to the lower end of that window just to, cut out some of that inflammation and just excess. But that's where I'm at currently. I can go as high, and I have gone as high as 6,000 calories before. And I definitely started to put on a little bit of weight at that intake, but most people probably aren't consuming 6,000 calories.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's so much. And you stay in ketosis while doing that. How do you limit your carbs so much while eating so many calories? Like there's trace carbs in everything, like eggs, even like a lot of meats, or even like sausages, cheese. How do you keep your carbs low enough? Like what are you eating when you're eating 3, 5, 6,000 calories to keep your fats high enough and your carbs low?
So I'm going to have a shameless plug here, but it totally is my answer to the question, which is I eat a keto brick every single day.
It's awesome.
And the Keto Brick is simply a 1,000 calorie shelf-stable meal replacement brick. But it's 1,000 calories and it's got perfect keto macros in the sense that the fat ratio is very high. Most bricks are north of 80% of the calories coming from fat, and very low total carbohydrates, not net, but total carbohydrates. So I'm able to eat one brick a day plus about a pound or 2 pounds, depending on what my macro goals are, of, either a ground beef or a ribeye or something of that nature, some eggs, and hit those target goal calorie and macro numbers without having excess calories coming from carbohydrates.
Got it. So you're not eating a ton of vegetables or avocados or things like that, because I imagine even that would add up pretty quickly. When you're consuming that many calories, the carbs would get up there.
Yeah, I don't really eat a whole lot of vegetation. I mean, every once in a while I get a hankering for some. I've actually been doing an experiment lately with homegrown cucumbers. My parents have a garden and they've been just sending me home with a bunch of, fresh raw cucumbers. And I've actually noticed that my morning blood glucose is trending down a little bit if I eat a cucumber with my ribeye the night before. So not really sure what's going on there, but I noticed I've been kind of playing around with that. But yeah, it's like, one cucumber would be my extent of carbohydrate intake from vegetables.
Oh, super interesting. I think Dom D'Agostino has talked about that a bit, of blood glucose readings of folks eating just steak or steak plus vegetables. A lot of people ask me about how to make liver more tasteful and how to cook it or incorporate other organ meats on carnivore. Optimal Carnivore can help you do just that with their grass-fed organ complex. It was created by carnivores for carnivores. They start by sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, gently freeze-drying the organs and encapsulating them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. Just 6 of these capsules a day is the same as eating an ounce of raw organ meat. I personally take these every single day, as does my wife. Even though we both eat liver and other organ meats, our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, and this unique blend has 9 different organs, including beef liver, brain, thymus, kidney, spleen, etc. And I think it's great to get a daily dose of these organs when you can. So it covers all your bases, whether you're at home or traveling. What's also cool is they plant a tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So visit www.optimalcarnivore.com/carnivorecast and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Thanks, and back to the show. A lot of bodybuilders use carbs to get like the muscle full look and peak. Do you need carbs to fill out, or what's your peaking strategy?
So this could be a very super involved question here. When you're peaking for a show, the goal is to, have your muscles fully dilated and fully filled out. So you want, glycogen to be filled out in the muscle tissue. You want any water to be sucked into the muscle cells themselves and not reside in that subcutaneous layer of skin between the skin and the muscles. If that is the case, then you're going to have this really like washed out watery look. And that's just not appealing. It's going to wash out all of your definition, your striations, and your vascularity. So you want to fill out and have achieve this paper thin skin look. And honestly, I've found that to be even easier to accomplish with a ketogenic diet because you're not holding near as much excess water retention when you get your electrolytes dialed in, and you're not having the carbohydrates. So you're not really having to worry about spilling over from, just not getting the glycogen equilibrium in check. That's just a whole variable that's not even part of the equation if you're doing a ketogenic protocol. So as long as your electrolytes are dialed in and your hydration is dialed in, you can have that filled out, crazy, freakish, vascular look in the complete absence of carbohydrates, especially if you're loading with like the right amount of proteins and fats. I typically do a keto caloric refeed the night before a show and kind of fill out my system with those, fatty acids and proteins and not so much the carbohydrates.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. And do like bodybuilders on higher carb diets use like high sodium feedings as well to peak, or do you think they like try to keep their, I don't know, like I'm just curious if you've heard of bodybuilders not on a ketogenic diet using any type of similar strategy with sodium.
Yeah, they'll definitely manipulate water and sodium, but unfortunately it's become a pretty unhealthy practice. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but typically they'll have like a sodium depletion stage, a water depletion stage, then they'll have a sodium loading phase, then they'll try and like just drink minuscule amounts of water throughout the show day, so that they don't spill over. However, if you get that wrong, which is pretty easy to do because there's so many variables, then you can have like severe cramping. You cannot fill out at all. You can just, I've literally competed with other athletes and we'd be in like a pose down, like the glory round where you're like just really giving it all you've got there at the end. And they literally had to walk off the stage because they were cramping so bad and they couldn't hit the poses because their electrolytes were off and they were dehydrated. That's all a problem I never have to worry about doing a properly implemented ketogenic prep.
Yeah, that's awesome. And have you heard of Brandon Roberts?
That name sounds familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on him.
Yeah, he's a really interesting researcher. You should have him on your podcast. He's been studying ketogenic diets for years and doing research on them. And what's interesting is like, as opposed to, what's his name down in Tampa, who works with Jacob Wilson, Ryan Lowry. Yeah. As opposed to like Ryan Lowry and they're producing great research on ketogenic diets in athletes. He has a much more skeptical view, and would say like ketogenic diets aren't optimal because some of the reasons I gave earlier, like you can't bulk or you can't bulk as well, or you can't peak, you can't refeed. There's no way to refeed without carbs. Be super interesting guest for your podcast. I think he's a really like polite and civil guy. You guys would have a good discussion.
I've got like this, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Obviously I'm a practitioner.
Sure.
I preach, not so much a, registered dietitian, certified, anything. I'm a professional bodybuilder. But I like this stuff. I dive super deep into it. I look at the research. I look at, what's being done and I self-experiment. And I feel like, there's so much, ignorance out there and there's so much like competition out there right now about, you got one scientist that comes out with this article and it says this and it conflicts with this other article. And you have all this just mass media drama. And like, personally, I like the fact that I don't have any, acronyms behind my name saying that I'm an MD, PhD, any of that, because all I can do is do what works well for me and the hundreds of clients I've worked with, and then illustrate those principles and practices to the best of my ability. And if it works for me and hundreds of others, then it's probably going to work well for somebody else out there that's listening to this. And if I can have that implemented and illustrated and somebody gleans something from it, then I don't care what the research says. I can anecdotally speak to myself and know that I'm feeling better and performing better than I ever have in my life, and many others are as well. So something must be working. Yeah,
it clearly is. And I think that's an awesome way to live your life and philosophy. Just be a shining example for others and share, which is fantastic. And on the topic of carbs and ketogenic diets. One thing that's been kind of controversial and popular recently in the space is metabolic flexibility, and the idea that perhaps always being in a state of ketosis isn't optimal. Your body needs to have the ability to tolerate carbs, and you need to demonstrate that by having carb refeeds or having carb days. Can you share your thoughts on this and some of the things you found, or you had a great podcast with Dom D'Agostino about this as well?
Yeah, so I'm probably gonna lose some subscribers when I talk about metabolic flexibility because it's definitely the hype right now. At its core, I totally agree with metabolic flexibility. So at its core, I would define it as simply being able to tap into stored body fat and dietary fat from a fuel standpoint. And if you're following the typical standard American diet like most people are coming from, they're not able to tap into their stored body fat for fuel. They're not using ketones to cross the blood-brain barrier and use as energy. They're using glucose and carbohydrates and heavily processed crappy foods at that. And to switch from that to a state of metabolic flexibility in which you're tapping into that stored fat is great. I want everybody to be metabolically flexible in that standpoint. What I don't like seeing is this new trend of like people that have, depended on carbs their whole life, gone keto, rode that hype. And then now that it's kind of like not the hype anymore, they're like, okay, well, let's go back to carbs. And that means you're super metabolically flexible if you can go to carbs, to go to keto, and then go back to carbs. And it's just nonsense. I mean, you don't have to reintroduce carbs once you become fat adapted to stay metabolically flexible. There may be a little bit of a lag period, but your body's smart. Like if you give it glucose, it knows what to do with that glucose. So to assume and preach that you have to go back and forth and that's what's optimal is just totally ignorant.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the excellent points you made on your podcast with Dom is around folks who have been keto for a long time. Or I'll let you make the point. Can you talk a little bit about what would appear to be a worse carb tolerance initially if you reintroduce carbs, if you've been keto really long term, and what that might mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, like if you look at, keto flu, for instance, you're like when you're born, you're in a state of ketosis. I mean, breast milk is ketotic. And then you eat carbs your whole life, 20, 30 years, however old you are. And then you start doing the ketogenic diet, you're going to have this lag period. I mean, you're basically totally 180 shifting your body's primary fuel source from carbs and glucose to fat and ketones. And there's a little bit of a lag that occurs there. Like it can't just turn on a dime. You get your electrolytes dialed in, you have properly, implement a ketogenic diet, you can kind of minimize those adverse effects. The same is pretty true in the inverse, in that if you are keto for a significant length of time and you switch back to carbs, I mean, you're probably not going to feel like $1 million for 24, 48 hours, but that doesn't mean your body forgets how to use and metabolize glucose and carbohydrates. Like you can follow a carbohydrate-based approach and your body's going to make the most of what you're giving it and figure out how to use it quite efficiently. But you don't have to go back and forth. I mean, we're not living in an apocalyptic zombie world in which the only food that we have access to is carbohydrates. I mean, we can pick and choose whatever we want to eat. So my perspective is you might as well pick and choose the foods that are going to have much more bang for their buck, much more nutrient density, and quite frankly, in my opinion, much tastier. And that's going to always be a ribeye over a sweet potato.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on to a different topic, let's talk a little bit about fasting. What does your typical schedule look like in terms of your meals, maybe now and while you're in contest prep?
Yeah, so I'm taking in enough calories now to warrant having, 2, maybe even 3 meals a day sometime, simply because I wouldn't want to eat 3,000, 4,000 calories in one sitting. I certainly can, but I don't really want to. So now I'll have 2 or 3 meals a day. I typically train around 6 in the morning. So I'll have a meal between, 2 hours after that training session. And then my next and last meal is usually sometime in the evening. So I'm getting a pretty good break in between those 2 meals, and then I fast throughout the night, obviously. When I'm in a caloric deficit and I have fewer calories to work with, I typically gravitate to an OMAD approach in which I'm having just one large meal once a day. And I feel more satisfied and I get more fulfillment from one larger meal that actually fills me up than, several smaller meals that just always leave me wanting more. So I typically go to an OMAD approach when I'm in a deficit.
And do That's interesting. Do you find it hard doing the type of, highly glycolytic, high volume bodybuilding style training you're doing, fasted?
No, not at all. I mean, I just did a 5.5 day fast and I trained pretty much every day and I felt like $1,000,000. I mean, the longer you're keto adapted and like strictly keto adapted, like that's what your body's using, it gets incredibly efficient at creating more MCT transporters, replenishing glycogen stores. Like there's no type of training activity that cannot be done in an optimal state in a pure state of ketosis. I mean, I know people want to get all personal and say, well, this sport, you have to have carbs, or this sport is just too glycolytic and keto won't work. But that's just nonsense. I mean, if you truly and deeply adapt, you can excel at whatever sport or physical activity you want to pursue in a totally ketogenic state.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how about multi-day fasting? You mentioned the 5-day fast. What's your opinion on multi-day fasting? Who do you think it's for, not for? When would you implement it? Things like that.
So I'm a huge fan of, extended fasting. I don't do it just a ton. I only really recommend doing it when you're at a caloric maintenance or surplus. I mean, fasting is great. You're going to have the cell apoptosis, autophagy, cell turnover, all that good, fresh cells coming into the system and killing of the old cells. But it is a stressor on the body, and you don't necessarily want to introduce too many stressors on the body simultaneously. So if you're in a caloric deficit, like if you're in a competition prep and you're having that stress introduced, the last thing you want to do is introduce another stress in the form of an extended fast. So yeah, I do intermittent fasting. Anything within a 24-hour evolving period is totally fine. That's not going to be a major stressor on the body. I think that's only advantageous, but anything longer than that, I'll wait and do after I've brought my calories back up to above or at maintenance.
Yep. Makes sense. And you mentioned being able to like refill glycogen and get MCTs for energy during fasting and fasted training. But what do you think about the muscle protein synthesis point around meal timing, like trying to have these multiple spikes per day where you're boosting your multiple muscle protein synthesis?
So there's been a lot of different studies that's come out about that. Some suggest that you need to have, multiple spikes throughout the day to really optimize that. I'm kind of in the camp that if you're taking in adequate protein over the course of 24 hours, then it doesn't really matter when you get that in. And for me, in my lifestyle, it's just more convenient to have one or two very large meals that hit my protein requirements for the day than to try and break it up through multiple smaller meals. Like I feel better mentally, I get more work done, I'm more productive, and I don't want to fool around. Like the reason I quit bro dieting in large part was because it wasn't sustainable. Like it didn't make sense for me to carry 6 or 7 Tupperwares with me everywhere I went. It just sucked away my productivity. So being able to hit my protein requirements for the day in 1 or 2 meals, I feel totally fine. I feel like I'm, optimizing muscle protein synthesis. My recovery is great. My strength is great. Like everything's only improved. So I don't feel hindered at all by condensing it into 1 or 2 meals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think especially with whole foods, the way your body breaks down protein and is able to release protein for muscle protein synthesis is a lot different than these studies where they're feeding people, whey shakes every 2 or 4 hours.
That's why it's really good to pair it with a fat. Like if you're consuming protein in the context of also consuming a solid bolus of dietary fat, that's going to help slow the absorption and digestion of that protein and kind of keep it feeding you throughout the day.
Yeah, totally. And one thing I wanted to ask you about is running. So you've taken up running. A lot of people would say it's like one of the least optimal forms of cardio for bodybuilding because it emphasizes the eccentric, the landing phase, and therefore causes more damage than other forms of cardio like biking or walking or hiking or the stair climber or elliptical. Why do you choose to do running?
I choose to do running simply because I don't have a Stairmaster because all the gyms have been closed. I mean, if I'm looking at cardio strictly from like an efficiency standpoint, then HIIT is probably the best. What I prefer from like a body composition standpoint is hands down, no questions asked, the Stairmaster. I can, just plug myself in the Stairmaster, knock out 20 minutes on that at a very high intensity level and, listen to an audiobook, meditate, whatever. And it's a great way to consistently get the same intensity and be able to like monitor and manipulate that. However, for a while there, all the gyms closed down and my Stairmaster access got revoked. So I basically switched to running. Yeah, so all the gyms are closed. I didn't really have an option to go do Stairmaster, which is what I would have preferred for cardio. So I decided to just start running. And I just kind of fell in love with it. Not because I was necessarily using it for cardio so much as I just like the process of, throwing on my running shoes, getting out of the office for a few moments. I only run like a mile and a half, 2 miles sometimes. And I just plug in a podcast, plug in an audiobook, and then go for a run. And I just feel kind of reinvigorated to tackle the rest of the day.
Yeah, I think that sounds awesome. I'm jealous, especially, knowing you do it on like the trails in Arkansas. It sounds beautiful. Yeah. I am always jealous of the runners here in Boston and have said for years, although it's never been the case, that Boston or Cambridge will make me into a runner because it's such a beautiful city. You can go down by the Charles River and the Esplanade. It's just, I feel like it's a really great way to kind of meditate and explore too, especially if you travel. It's a great way to see a new place, see a city, like if you go to Europe or something. So I'm always a bit jealous of runners in that way.
100%, man. Like it's kind of funny because bodybuilders have this negative stigma towards running. It's like, cardio in general is like viewed as a bad thing. It's like, oh, I'm bulking, bro. And running, especially, it's like people just, kind of turn their nose up to it from a bodybuilding standpoint. But if you cannot like on a whim just get up and run a mile, then you get some bigger issues. You got to be able to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Keto Brick. And you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, major life change with the new warehouse, new factory. What are some of the next steps for Keto Brick, and what's getting you excited there?
Yeah, man. So Keto Brick, like we've been building the business for several years now, and we've kind of like the evolution of Keto Brick has been pretty crazy. We started out just making it, my girlfriend at the time, wife now, Crystal, in our little bitty apartment kitchen. And then we started leasing this commercial kitchen in Arkansas, Little Rock. And we drive like 3 hours to get there. We stay up all night making bricks, and we drive 3 hours back to our apartment. And then we got this warehouse space that used to be an old bakery and chocolate factory. And we moved into the warehouse. We're literally living in that warehouse now. And we've basically renovated the kitchen to be good for our Keto Brick production. We've got the podcast studio here. We've got the gym here. We've got everything here. It's like a compound. But then we just found this building in Northwest Arkansas, which is where I've always wanted to kind of wind up. And this building is twice as big as the 3 buildings that we're currently leasing. And we're just it used to be an old grocery store. So it's already got all the plumbing, all the electrical, everything you need for a commercial kitchen space built in. And it's got 5 walk-in coolers. It's just a massive, massive scale up from where we are currently. And I'm just going to deck it out. It's going to have this colossal gym in there. It's going to have a podcast studio. It's going to put Joe Rogan's podcast studio to shame. It's going to be awesome, man. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm so happy for you and the team at Keto Brick. That's really cool. And I'm sure it feels like it's been building for years now. But just watching your success and watching you scale and work through all the struggles and hardship of building a physical product, getting the licenses, getting the approvals, doing the testing. I have a lot of admiration for all of that.
I appreciate it, man. It's been a journey for sure. Most companies, especially in the food product space, typically outsource things. So they'll go through a co-packer, they'll find somebody that can produce, and then they'll just focus on the marketing and getting the word out. And I don't know, that's just never really resonated with me. Like I've always liked getting my hands dirty, liked building things like bootstrapping from the ground up. And that's kind of what we did with this. We bootstrapped it from the ground up. Everything that we do, we've done in-house, like all the formulation, all the packaging, all the everything. Like we've just figured out how to do it and got it done. And we're just excited to keep growing and keep learning and keep providing something that people find value in.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what aspects of the business and entrepreneurship get you the most excited, Robert? Is it the success, your interactions with customers, employees, the chance to like be creative and make something? What is really what you find the most meaning in?
Man, it's a combination of all the above, really. I've worked jobs in the past that I found no passion in, no fulfillment, and just left me empty. Even if the money was good, like it just wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't filling my cup. And I've tried to start businesses that just had a monetary goal, and those businesses all failed. Like the reason Keto Brick, Keto Savage, Live Savage, the reason this has been successful is because there is no plan B. Like this is the life I live and breathe. I do it every single day. tirelessly because I love it and I want to continue doing it every single day. And when you pour yourself into something like that, it just blossoms into something that not only you can be proud of, but hopefully helps other people. And the emails, the DMs, the messages I get on a daily basis about how something I said in a podcast or in a video or whatever helped improve someone's health, nutrition, and just outlook on life and mindset, like those comments, that's my oxygen. That's what gives me confidence to know that I'm doing something right with my life and my time here on earth. And to be able to take that and like have it grow into the business that it is and just continue to become symbiotic in nature with everything that I'm doing in life. I mean, it's the most fulfilling, rewarding thing I've ever done.
Yeah, that's super cool. And Robert, really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. It's been awesome chatting with you. Great to hear about some of the success you're having and ways in which you're constantly stretching yourself and working to improve yourself and others around you. I think folks will get a ton out of this. And you have Keto Savage, Keto Brick, Keto Savage on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Where else can folks find you? What else should I link to in the show notes?
Hey man, that's pretty much it. Keto Savage, Keto Brick. You'll find me. I'm working on a complete keto contest prep book and course, but it'll be a little while before that comes out. But it's gonna be good when it does.
Oh, very cool. I'm looking forward to that. Well, thanks again for your time today, Robert, and hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, man. You have a good one, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on Carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out, and share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.